The studio lights blazed with the kind of polish only Oprah's stage could command. The audience leaned forward, eager, expectant, certain they were about to watch another masterclass in control from America's most recognizable interviewer. Oprah sat poised, her smile disarming, her tone rich with authority. And then she leaned in, asking the question that carried more bite than warmth. It wasn't curiosity, it was challenge. The kind of question meant to test, to press, to remind the world that this was her stage, her narrative. The room hushed. Cameras tightened their gaze on Jasmine Crockett. A younger voice, a rising figure suddenly placed under the spotlight of a media empire. Many expected hesitation, the nervous stumble of someone who should feel outmatched. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't shift in her chair. She met Oprah's eyes with a calm so sharp it cut through the theater of the moment. And then, with the slightest pause, measured, deliberate, she began to speak. No raised voice, no defensiveness, just precision. Her words landed not like a rehearsed answer, but like a mirror, reflecting the weight of the question back to its source. The audience gasped softly, realizing something rare was unfolding. The balance of power in the room was shifting. Oprah blinked. A flicker of surprise cracked through the flawless veneer of confidence. The queen of the talk show throne, the arbiter of America's living room conversations, found herself confronted with an answer she hadn't prepared for, an answer that rewrote the script she had expected to dominate. Every breath in the room seemed suspended, as if the very air was charged with anticipation. Was Crockett really doing this? Was she on live television, standing eye to eye with Oprah, not as a guest, not as a subordinate, but as an equal challenger in the arena of ideas? The energy changed. Viewers at home felt it through their screens. The studio audience felt it in the pit of their stomachs. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a clash of eras, of identities, of truths long waiting to be spoken aloud. But no one, not even Oprah herself, was ready for the next line Jasmine dropped. To understand why this clash carried so much weight, you have to step back and look at the arena where it unfolded. Oprah Winfrey's platform isn't just television, it's cultural canon. For decades, she has been more than a host. She has been the nation's confidant, the gatekeeper of credibility, the voice that could make or break reputations. To sit across from Oprah was to sit inside a spotlight that reached into every living room in America. And that spotlight had always been hers to command. But on this day, something shifted. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, not yet a household name, but already a growing force. A congresswoman whose reputation was forged not through entertainment, but through struggle, law, and unapologetic advocacy. For Oprah, this was another episode, another chance to shape a national conversation. For Crockett, this was something else entirely, an opportunity to cut through the noise and prove that truth doesn't need permission to speak. The symbolic weight of this moment was immense. Oprah represented legacy power, polished, respected, adored, but also insulated. Crockett represented insurgent truth, raw, unfiltered, deeply rooted in the lived realities of her community. The clash wasn't simply about two women on stage. It was about who gets to frame the American story. Do the narratives of the past continue unchallenged, or do new voices carve out space to be heard? Viewers watching live may not have articulated it in those terms, but they felt it. When Crockett responded with that first sharp, fearless line, people leaned closer to their screens. They knew instinctively that this was not business as usual. The rhythm of daytime television had given way to the pulse of something historic. And there was another layer: identity. Oprah, for all her groundbreaking achievements, had come to symbolize a kind of assimilationist triumph, success within the system, celebrated by the mainstream. Crockett embodied a different energy, fiery, unapologetic, unwilling to dilute her message to fit old molds. For many watching, immigrants, working-class families, young progressives, Crockett's presence was validation. She was proof that you could confront power directly, on its own stage, and not bow to it. The air grew heavy with implication. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. Every word carried the weight of generations, the echo of those who had been silenced, dismissed, or told to wait their turn. And now, in real time, millions were watching a newcomer bend the arc of that silence toward speech. Oprah, seasoned as she was, tried to reassert control. A sharper tone here, a skeptical eyebrow there, the familiar tools of a master interviewer. But the audience could sense it. The ground beneath her was not as steady as before. Crockett's composure wasn't just holding, it was growing. She wasn't on the defensive. She was rewriting the terms of engagement. The moment crystallized into something larger than a conversation. It became a referendum on voice itself. Who has it? Who's allowed to use it? And who dares to challenge those who have long monopolized it? And when Crockett leaned forward to answer, the stakes suddenly became higher than just an interview. For more than 3 decades, Oprah Winfrey has been more than a talk show host. She has been a cultural institution. Her rise from poverty in Mississippi to the pinnacle of American media is legendary, a story woven into the national fabric. She is the woman who turned her name into a brand synonymous with power, influence, and credibility. Politicians courted her. Celebrities sought her approval. Millions of viewers trusted her judgment like scripture. In living rooms across the country, Oprah's word often carried more weight than the evening news. Her show wasn't just about interviews. It was about shaping narratives. She had the rare ability to make guests reveal truths they hadn't planned to share. Sometimes it was gentle, other times piercing, but always in her favor. When Oprah spoke, the room listened. When she asked, the world answered. And when she endorsed, whether a book, a product, or even a presidential candidate, the ripple effects shook markets and shifted history. This mastery created an aura around her, an almost untouchable quality. She was the arbiter of what mattered and what didn't, who was worthy of empathy and who was not. To sit in the chair opposite Oprah was to enter a world where she dictated the terms. Guests often found themselves yielding to her rhythm, her pace, her tone. It was her empire, and she never let anyone forget it. But here lies the contradiction. The very power that made Oprah untouchable also insulated her. Decades of dominance meant she was rarely challenged in real time. She was used to control, to reverence, to being the last word in the room. And that kind of power, while dazzling, can also create blind spots. Because when you are always the one asking the questions, you seldom face the fire of unexpected answers. Oprah's interviews became cultural events because she knew how to corner her subjects with subtle precision. A raised eyebrow, a pointed pause, a softly loaded question. These were her weapons, and few ever resisted. Most melted under her gaze, conceding ground, revealing vulnerabilities that only bolstered her aura. The audience adored her for it. She was, after all, Oprah, the woman who could draw tears from presidents and confessions from movie stars, yet beneath that mastery lay a comfort zone. Her greatest victories came when she set the frame, when guests played by the unwritten rules of reverence. She excelled at orchestrating moments that uplifted her narrative authority. But what happens when someone refuses to play by those rules? What happens when the guest refuses to be a subject and instead becomes a challenger? That was the unseen tension brewing in this live TV exchange. Oprah, as always, believed she could command the space. She had done it countless times before. To the audience, her confidence was reassuring, familiar, almost regal. But to Crockett, it was something else, an opening. A chance to pierce through the polish and expose the blind spot in Oprah's empire of control. This is not to say Oprah lacked brilliance or resilience, far from it. Her empire was built on surviving storms, breaking barriers, and navigating a world that wasn't built to celebrate women like her. She had earned her crown, but in the process of holding it, she had grown accustomed to being the unchallenged force. The danger of that comfort is assuming the next conversation will follow the same script as the last. In that studio, Oprah projected the same confidence that had carried her through thousands of interviews. But something was different. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, whose presence wasn't rooted in seeking approval, but in demanding respect. She wasn't there to bask in Oprah's light. She was there to bring her own. And that was the miscalculation. Oprah thought she was facing another guest. What she was really facing was a new era of voice, one that wouldn't bow to her authority. The clash wasn't just generational, it was ideological. Oprah stood as the symbol of legacy dominance, Crockett as the embodiment of insurgent truth. And as the questions turned sharper, the temperature in the room shifted. The audience began to sense it, even if Oprah did not. She was stepping into territory where her old methods might not be enough. But across from her sat someone Oprah had underestimated. Long before Jasmine Crockett ever stepped onto a stage that bore Oprah's name, her story was already one of grit, sacrifice, and fearless resolve. She wasn't born into privilege, nor did she inherit a media empire. Her path was carved through struggle, through the kind of lived reality that forces you to fight for every inch of ground you stand on. Crockett grew up knowing what it meant to be underestimated. In classrooms, in courtrooms, in the halls of power, there was always someone ready to assume she didn't belong. And yet, time after time, she proved them wrong. Education became her first weapon. She pushed herself through the rigors of law school, not because it was easy, but because she understood the necessity of knowledge in a world quick to deny it to people who looked like her. Each textbook, each late night spent studying, was fuel for a greater mission, arming herself with the tools to not only survive the system but to confront it head-on. As a young attorney, Crockett didn't chase corporate clients or lucrative contracts. She went where the need was greatest. She defended the voiceless, those who couldn't afford high-priced representation but deserved justice all the same. Her cases weren't glamorous. They didn't bring her wealth or headlines, but they gave her something far more important: credibility with the people, respect from the communities she served, and a reputation as someone who would never back down. That reputation followed her into politics. When she ran for office, she did so not as a polished insider, but as a fighter carrying the scars of battles waged on behalf of ordinary people. She was loud when others told her to be quiet, unapologetic when others advised caution. Her authenticity became her greatest strength. Voters didn't just see a politician. They saw a reflection of themselves, someone who had walked their walk and understood their struggles. Fearlessness defined her rise. Whether challenging powerful committees in Congress or calling out hypocrisy in the media, Crockett displayed an unwillingness to be silenced. It wasn't bluster, it was conviction. She had seen too much inequity, too much systemic failure to temper her voice for the comfort of elites. Every speech, every statement was anchored in a truth many recognized but few dared to say aloud. And this is what made her encounter with Oprah so electrifying. On one side stood an empire, polished and seasoned, accustomed to deference. On the other stood Crockett, forged in the fire of resistance, unwilling to bow even when tradition dictated she should. The contrast was stark. Oprah's power was built on narrative dominance, while Crockett's power came from authenticity sharpened by struggle. It's easy to underestimate someone like Crockett until you see her in action. She carried herself with the humility of someone who knew where she came from, yet with the presence of someone who understood the weight of the moment. Each time she stepped behind a microphone, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was channeling the stories of immigrants, workers, mothers, and young people told to stay quiet. She became their voice in rooms where they had long been excluded. That is why her rise mattered. It wasn't about personal ambition. It was about representation, about making visible the people America too often renders invisible. Her identity, her background, her unapologetic style weren't obstacles. They were proof of possibility. For countless viewers, seeing Crockett rise wasn't just inspiring, it was vindicating. It said, yes, we belong here too. By the time she sat across from Oprah, Crockett carried more than her own name into that studio. She carried the weight of every courtroom client who couldn't afford justice, every constituent who had been dismissed by the system, every young person who wondered if they'd ever be taken seriously. That weight didn't break her, it steadied her. It reminded her why silence was never an option. So when the cameras rolled and Oprah leaned forward with the authority of decades, Crockett didn't shrink. She didn't soften. She leaned into the moment with the same resolve that had carried her from underdog attorney to rising national voice. And that resilience would soon be tested in front of millions. The exchange began like any other televised interview, measured questions, polite smiles, an air of civility carefully crafted for daytime audiences. But beneath the surface, tension was already simmering. Oprah's tone, usually warm and invitational, carried a sharper edge. Each question landed less like an inquiry and more like a test. She leaned into her reputation as the nation's great inquisitor, probing with a confidence that suggested she already knew the answers she expected to hear. "Congresswoman," Oprah pressed, her voice silk over steel, "don't you think your rhetoric risks alienating the very people you claim to represent?" It was the kind of question designed to corner, to paint Crockett as reckless, perhaps even irresponsible. The studio audience murmured softly, sensing the weight behind the words. Oprah's body language radiated authority. Chin lifted, eyes fixed, posture commanding. She wasn't just asking. She was asserting. But Crockett didn't blink. She let the silence linger, her pause deliberate, her calm unnerving. When she finally answered, her voice was steady, her cadence unhurried. "The truth isn't reckless. The truth is uncomfortable. And if people are alienated by hearing it, perhaps the problem isn't the rhetoric, it's the reality." A ripple ran through the audience. Some leaned back in surprise, others leaned forward in admiration. Oprah arched an eyebrow, her signature gesture of controlled disbelief. She pressed again, this time with a hint of dismissal. "But surely you must see the value of compromise, of tempering your tone to reach a broader audience?" It was a classic tactic: invite the guest to admit they've overstepped, to soften their stance for public approval. But Crockett remained composed, her hands folded, her gaze unbroken. "Compromise has its place," she said evenly, "but justice has no halfway point. People don't live halfway lives. They don't experience halfway discrimination. They deserve the whole truth, unfiltered." The air in the studio thickened. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. The tightness in Oprah's smile, the quiet fire in Crockett's eyes. The duel was no longer beneath the surface. It was front and center. Oprah shifted tactics. Her voice grew firmer, almost incredulous. "Are you suggesting then that my approach, this platform, hasn't been enough? That decades of elevating voices here somehow fell short?" It was a loaded question, brimming with ego, designed to remind everyone of her stature. The audience hushed, sensing the stakes. Crockett inhaled slowly, then exhaled, her response deliberate. "I'm suggesting that no single platform, no matter how powerful, can replace the voices of the people themselves. Elevating others is meaningful, yes, but so is making room for those who were never invited." The silence that followed was electric. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the room. Oprah's composure was intact, but the edges showed strain. Her dismissive tone had not unsettled Crockett. If anything, it had sharpened her resolve. For the viewers at home, the dynamic was unmistakable. Oprah was overconfident, leaning on the authority of legacy power. Crockett, in contrast, was unflappable, steady under fire, meeting every pointed jab with clarity and conviction. The clash wasn't just verbal, it was symbolic. One represented dominance through history, the other resilience through truth. And as the exchange intensified, the atmosphere grew electric. The audience knew they were witnessing something rare, not just an interview, but a turning of the tide. The kind of moment when the balance of power visibly shifts, second by second, word by word. Then came the moment where Crockett flipped the script. The silence before Jasmine Crockett's response was the kind that bends time. The audience, the cameras, even Oprah herself seemed to hang in suspension, waiting to see if this young congresswoman would retreat under the glare of America's most commanding interviewer. Oprah's eyes bore into her, steady and expectant. She had asked the kind of question meant to corner, to box in, to remind the world who owned this stage. But Crockett did not retreat. She leaned forward instead, her shoulders squared, her expression calm, but charged with a gravity that drew every gaze in the room. When she finally spoke, her words carried a weight that seemed to silence even the air around them. "You know, Oprah," Crockett began, her tone respectful yet unwavering, "people often tell me to be careful with my words. They tell me not to speak too strongly, not to call out injustice too plainly because it might make others uncomfortable. But here's the thing. People in my community don't get to choose comfort. They live the consequences of injustice every single day. Their lives don't pause for someone else's convenience. A murmur swept through the audience. Oprah blinked, perhaps expecting a softer pivot, perhaps anticipating the usual deference. Instead, Crockett's voice only grew stronger, each syllable deliberate, each pause calculated. You ask if my rhetoric risks alienating people, but what about the rhetoric of silence? What about the alienation that comes when entire communities never hear their struggles acknowledged in spaces like this one? I'm not reckless for telling the truth. I would be reckless if I didn't. The room erupted into applause, raw and spontaneous. Some in the audience stood, clapping with the kind of conviction that can't be manufactured. Oprah's smile tightened, the kind of smile that masked unease. For the first time, the aura of total control around her seemed to falter. Crockett pressed on, sensing the shift. This platform, she said, sweeping a hand gently toward the cameras, is powerful. I respect that. I know what it means to sit here. But respect doesn't mean silence. Power doesn't absolve us from responsibility. If anything, it demands more honesty, more courage, more willingness to confront the things we'd rather ignore. Oprah's lips parted, as if to interject, but Crockett didn't yield. Her voice rose, not in volume but in clarity, slicing through the tension like a blade. You've built a legacy on elevating voices, and that's something no one can deny. But even legacies must evolve. If we stop at elevation without transformation, then we are simply rearranging the furniture in a burning house. My job isn't to make injustice palatable. It's to call it out, even when it shakes the room. The audience gasped audibly this time. The metaphor struck hard, vivid and inescapable. Oprah's eyes narrowed slightly, her head tilting, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The stage no longer belonged to her. It belonged to Crockett, and Crockett knew it. She paused deliberately, letting the words sink in. You could feel the silence pressing down, heavy and charged. Even the cameras seemed to hold still, as though unwilling to cut away from a moment that was already becoming historic. Then came the line that sealed it. Power has never handed over space willingly. Every inch of progress has been demanded, not gifted. And today, I'm not here to ask for permission to speak truth. I'm here to remind everyone watching that we don't need permission anymore. The room exploded. Applause thundered, cheers rang out, the audience leapt to its feet. Even those at home, watching through their screens, could feel the electricity. It was the kind of moment that seared itself into memory, destined to be clipped, shared, replayed 1,000,000 times across every platform. Oprah, visibly stunned, tried to regain composure. She adjusted in her chair, her smile flickering, her practiced calm strained under the weight of what had just unfolded. For decades, she had commanded every conversation, every reveal, every dramatic turn. But here, in front of millions, the tide had shifted. She was no longer the conductor of the drama. She was caught in it, and Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned back now, her presence unshaken, her tone softer but no less powerful. I didn't come here to clash with you. I came here because people like my grandmother, my neighbors, my community, they deserve to be seen, heard, and respected. And if speaking the truth unsettles some, then maybe it's because the truth was long overdue. The applause didn't die down. It grew, wave after wave, until even the cameras caught audience members wiping tears, nodding, cheering. Oprah glanced at them, perhaps realizing in that instant that the story had escaped her control. The interview that was supposed to highlight her power had instead spotlighted someone else's courage. The cameras panned to Oprah one last time, capturing the flicker of disbelief in her eyes. For once, she didn't have the final word. For once, silence wasn't a weapon she wielded. It was a weight pressing against her. Crockett had flipped the script. And in doing so, she had reframed not just the interview, but the balance of power itself. But the shockwaves didn't end in that studio. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words left her lips, the tremors began. In the studio, the applause was thunderous, a wave that rolled through the audience and refused to quiet. But outside those walls, in the endless expanse of social media, the real shockwaves detonated. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began flooding Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Viewers had snatched the soundbite, "We don't need permission anymore," and turned it into a rallying cry. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Crockett clapback trended within an hour. Oprah stunned followed close behind, a reminder that even cultural icons weren't immune to being challenged. Memes sprouted almost instantly, Oprah's stunned expression frozen and captioned, paired with Crockett's sharp rebuttal. One viral post showed Oprah's blink in slow motion, overlaid with the text, "When the script flips on live TV." Another simply paired Crockett's words with images of protest marches. Fists raised, voices chanting, commentators rushed in. Pundits on cable news debated whether Oprah had finally met her match. Progressive voices celebrated Crockett as the embodiment of fearlessness, someone willing to shatter the aura of untouchability around one of America's most powerful figures. Conservative commentators bristled, dismissing her as disrespectful, a word that only fueled the narrative of a woman refusing to bow. Celebrities weighed in, too. A-list actors tweeted their admiration, activists praised her courage, and younger stars reposted the clip with captions like, "This is the energy we need. For every cheerleader." There were critics, but the conversation was unavoidable. Crockett's words had pierced through the noise of daily headlines and planted themselves at the center of cultural discourse. For everyday people, though, it wasn't about politics or media strategy. It was about recognition. Comments poured in from viewers who felt seen, who recognized their own struggles in Crockett's steady defiance. "That's how my mother talks when she's tired of being dismissed," one user wrote. "That's how I feel every time I'm told to tone it down," another added. The moment had transcended the boundaries of a single interview. It had become a mirror reflecting back the frustrations of countless lives. And then came the ripple effect of humor, the great equalizer of the internet. TikTok creators spliced Crockett's lines into dance challenges. Instagram Reels used her voice as narration for everything from classroom debates to family dinners. The serious merged with the playful, ensuring the clip reached audiences far beyond the political junkies. Crockett's voice became unavoidable, echoing through feeds, For You pages, and trending tabs. Oprah's silence, too, became a character in the story. The queen of interviews, left momentarily speechless, was something few had ever witnessed. Her reaction gif spread across platforms, used whenever someone was caught off guard. What had been a crack in her armor on live TV became the meme that defined the week. For Oprah's fans, it was a shock. For Crockett's supporters, it was vindication. Cable news networks played the clip on loop. Late-night hosts joked about it in their monologues. Morning shows debated whether it was a passing viral sensation or the beginning of a political turning point. Each replay only magnified the moment. Each discussion only widened its reach. But amid all the noise, one thing was clear. Crockett had captured something real. She had turned a stage that wasn't hers into a platform that belonged to everyone watching who had ever felt silenced. Her words were repeated not because they were clever, but because they were true. The audience wasn't just entertained, they were mobilized, energized, validated. And Oprah? For the first time in decades, she wasn't the story. She was the backdrop. Her stunned silence had become the foil to Crockett's defiance, her power eclipsed by a moment she could not control. The digital aftershocks only intensified over the next few days. Hashtags evolved into op-eds, memes into campaigns, viral clips into organizing tools. Crockett's team leaned into the momentum, sharing her words across official channels, amplifying the chorus of support. What began as a television interview had transformed into a cultural event. And yet, behind all the noise, a deeper lesson was emerging. When the noise of the viral storm began to settle, something deeper lingered. Beneath the memes, beneath the hashtags, beneath the endless replays of Oprah's stunned expression, there was a core truth shining through. Jasmine Crockett's moment on that stage was not just about sparring with a cultural titan. It was about something larger. Something that stretched far beyond television ratings or internet fame. Her words reminded people that power, no matter how vast, should never be used to silence truth. In that instant, Crockett embodied the conviction that dignity cannot be bargained away, even when standing opposite someone who has built an empire on commanding rooms. She didn't just refuse to be diminished, she insisted on being seen, being heard, and being respected. That insistence resonated with anyone who has ever been underestimated, talked over, or told their voice was too sharp for polite company. The moral clarity of that exchange became undeniable. Courage has a way of cutting through the noise. Crockett did not win by volume nor by spectacle. She won by grounding herself in truth, in authenticity, in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are standing on solid ground. Against Oprah's carefully honed aura of dominance, it was Crockett's unshakable dignity that commanded the stage. For America, the moment carried symbolic weight. In a time when voices at the margins are often pressured to compromise, Crockett's refusal to yield became a lesson in resistance. She showed that representation is not about mere visibility, but about the power to speak without apology. She modeled a kind of courage that challenges hierarchies, that refuses to play by rules written to keep others small. And in her rise from humble beginnings to a national spotlight, Crockett demonstrated the universality of her truth. You don't need an empire to matter. You don't need decades of media dominance to have authority. What you need is conviction. What you need is the courage to insist that truth has value, even when it disrupts the comfort of those sitting higher on the ladder. For Oprah, the moment may have been humbling, but for viewers, it was liberating. Millions saw proof that even giants can be questioned, that even the most untouchable figures can be challenged by someone who refuses to shrink. That revelation carried both inspiration and responsibility. Because if Crockett could hold her ground in that studio, then others too could hold their ground in their own lives, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in family debates, in community struggles. The confrontation, stripped of its celebrity trappings, became a parable about values. That respect is not given by titles, but earned by courage. That dignity is not a favor granted by power, but a right claimed by truth. It was a reminder that democracy itself depends on people willing to speak up, to disrupt, to risk being underestimated. And so the moral lesson crystallized. The measure of greatness is not how many people you can silence, but how many truths you can withstand. Crockett reminded us that dominance fades, but dignity endures, which leaves us with one final question. What role will you play in this story? Oprah Winfrey, the woman who has stunned so many guests throughout her career, found herself speechless. And across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat steady, her words echoing louder than any applause. It was a moment that flipped the script, proof that truth can pierce through arrogance and that courage can leave even the most powerful figures without a reply. That's why this clash matters. Because it wasn't just Crockett versus Oprah. It was the timeless struggle between dominance and dignity, between image and authenticity, between the illusion of control and the reality of truth. Crockett's triumph was not just her own. It belonged to everyone who has ever been underestimated. Every immigrant family who has fought to be seen. Every voice told it was too sharp, too bold, too much. But here's the thing. Moments like these only gain power when they spread. When stories of truth standing tall against arrogance reach millions, they become more than headlines. They become movements. And that's where you come in. If you felt that spark watching Crockett hold her ground, don't let it fade. Share this story. Subscribe so you don't miss the next time dignity rises against power. Add your voice to the millions refusing to stay silent. Because the more we amplify these moments, the harder it becomes for arrogance to pretend it still owns the stage. Oprah may have been left stunned, but we are left inspired. And inspiration demands action. This is your invitation. Be part of a community that believes in truth, in resilience, in justice, because dignity deserves an audience. And now, it has one.